Hello. In this section, we'll be discussing about Scrum Events. Scrum Events are designed to create regularity and rhythm for the entire Scrum team. Scrum Events are also used to minimize the number of meetings and improve the effectiveness of the entire Scrum team. All the Scrum Events in Scrum are time-boxed, which means that they can end before the time box expires, but not after. The exception to that rule is the sprint. The sprint is always of the same duration, and we shall discuss about that in detail in this section as we go along. Sprint is a container event. All the other events of Scrum happen within the sprint, and these are formal events for inspection and adaptation. Failure to have any of these Scrum events reduces the effectiveness of Scrum. Let's see in detail what these events are all about. The very first event in Scrum is the sprint. Sprint is a container event. The duration is a month or less. If the question is how do we determine the length of the sprint, well, it may depend on how frequently you want to receive feedback from your customers, and it may also depend on how frequently the market conditions are changing. Based on that, you may select an appropriate length of your sprint. But once selected, this length remains consistent throughout the working time of the product. During a sprint, the development team creates a done, usable, potentially releasable increment. A new sprint starts as soon as the previous one ends. There are no breaks. And during the sprint, it is ensured that the sprint goal is not endangered in any way. During a sprint, the product owner and the development team may renegotiate the scope of the sprint, but the sprint goal does not change. This ensures that high-quality increments are delivered at the end of every sprint. Now consider sprint as a project. If a project runs with a time box of 30 days, you're also managing your risk to only 30 days. And that's one of the benefits of sprints. You can inspect and adapt your progress after the end of a month, and then determine if it's worth carrying out the project further. That's managing risk with Scrum. Now sprints occasionally can get cancelled. It's a very rare event, but it may happen, and it's a traumatic one. Let's take, for example, that your team is building a new tax component, and a new taxation rule comes into picture because of which your current development does not make sense anymore, which means your sprint goal itself is obsolete. In cases like these, the product owner, maybe after discussions with stakeholders and the development team, may cancel a sprint because the sprint goal does not make sense anymore. When a sprint gets cancelled, all the done work is basically reviewed and, if possible, released. The undone work goes back to the product backlog, and the moment one sprint ends, a new one starts. And that happens with the sprint planning meeting, which we'll discuss next. The very first event that happens when a sprint begins is the sprint planning meeting. The sprint planning meeting is time boxed to 8 hours. This is for a sprint that is a month long. So let's say that your sprint is just 2 weeks. If your answer is that in that case your sprint planning meeting will be for 4 hours, well, that's incorrect. The time box is 8 hours. It doesn't matter what is the length of your sprint. As soon as the 8 hours end, your sprint starts. During the sprint planning meeting, the entire Scrum team attends. No stakeholders, just the Scrum team. And the Scrum Master ensures that everyone understands the purpose of this meeting, and this meeting happens. During the sprint planning meeting, we basically discuss two things. What are the things that can be delivered as an increment in this particular sprint, and how will these requirements be converted into done increments? What can be done is decided by the objectives of the product owner, any dependencies if the development team has with other teams, the capacity of the development team, the past performance of the development team, and if any kind of special capabilities are required for delivering certain items. Any ready items which are available for development and fulfill the objective of the product owner can be selected for development in a sprint. The development team discusses how these items will be converted into a working increment, and that is the how portion of the entire sprint planning meeting. The what aspect of the sprint planning meeting provides a sprint goal. This is crafted along with the development team and the product owner. And how these items will be converted into done increments is decided by the development team, which is self-organized. By identifying what can be done in a sprint and how these will be done, the Scrum team is inspecting the product backlog and adapting a sprint backlog. Every sprint is required to deliver a done increment. These done increments are usable and can be released if needed. Let's try and understand how a typical sprint planning meeting may work. The Scrum Master will basically start the meeting by addressing everyone and informing everyone about the purpose of this particular meeting. The product owner provides the objective of the next sprint. Let's say the objective of the next sprint is to create a small module that does a tax calculation for employees of an organization. At this point of time, there will be a backlog where there are a number of items that have to be developed. And a few of these items may relate to this particular objective that the product owner wants to achieve. It's necessary that these items are well defined and understood by the development team in order for them to select these items into the sprint backlog. Once these items have been selected, this crafts the sprint goal. Once the sprint goal has been crafted and the what portion of the sprint backlog has been identified, the development team may form small groups and discuss how these elements will be converted into a done increment. It's not necessary that everything that is selected for development in a sprint planning meeting is discussed. What is necessary is that enough discussion happens for the development team to go back and start working on something. This is the essence of the sprint planning meeting. I'll be sitting down for this one because the next event that we are going to discuss is the Daily Scrum. Now, it's majorly known in most of the parts of the industry as the daily stand-up. Well, not necessary. It's just a 15-minute time box event. And what is important is that the entire meeting completes within 15 minutes. Standing up, not that important. In this event, the development team discusses what they will be doing for the next 24 hours. It's a key event for inspection of the sprint goal and adaptation of the sprint backlog. The team basically sees how they are progressing towards the sprint goal, and if any adjustments are to be made to the sprint backlog, this is the meeting where it is done. Well, the team may meet after this daily scrum for a detailed discussion, but at least the initial discussions happen in this meeting. That's the planning meeting that happens, and it saves a lot of time later. The development team can decide the structure of the daily scrum. One of the most used structures is what we did yesterday, what we plan to do today, and if we have any impediments. Well, that's just one of the ways of doing it. Impediments, for example, don't need to be reported only during the daily scrum. They can be reported at any point of time. During the daily scrum, we just understand what is the progress on removal of that impediment. The Scrum Master ensures that the daily scrum meeting happens, but it is the accountability of the development team to have it. And no one other than the development team is required during the daily scrum meeting. In case others do attend, then it is the Scrum Master's responsibility to make sure that there are no disruptions. In case the development team finds out during the daily scrum that the sprint goal is being endangered, or there's not enough work to actually proceed with the entire sprint, they may have another meeting with the product owner where these things can be discussed, and if any flags need to be raised, can happen. This is the importance of the daily scrum meeting. At the end of the sprint, the entire Scrum team has what we call the sprint review. This is a 4-hour time box event for a month-long sprint. And during this event, the stakeholders invited by the product owner and the Scrum team collectively inspect the increment. During this meeting, the product owner basically tells everyone what are the things from the product backlog that have been done and which were the things which we could not do for some reason. The development team discusses the challenges that they faced during the sprint and how did they overcome it. The product owner discusses the projections, and the stakeholders provide more insight about the marketplace, and everyone provides inputs towards the timelines, budget, marketplace, and the next possible features to be released which are the most valuable to the product. These things become input to the product backlog, and that is what gets adapted during this event. One of the crucial aspects to understand is that the sprint review is not just a showcase. It's not a demonstration for the stakeholders. This is a key inspect and adapt meeting in which the stakeholders provide feedback to the done increment. This is something that is crucial for the development of the product. We did discuss during the sprint container event section that the length of the sprint is determined by how frequently we want to receive feedback from the stakeholders. This is the event that provides feedback from the stakeholders. Obviously, this is not the only event, but this is one of the most crucial events. And that's the importance of the sprint review meeting. A sprint ends with the sprint retrospective event. This is a 3-hour time box event for a month-long sprint. And this is a formal event where the team inspects itself and adapts its working style. The purpose of this meeting is to discuss how the last sprint went with regards to people, processes, tools, and relationships. Improvements are identified and a plan is created in order to have these improvements in place as soon as possible. What is also identified is the immediate actions which are necessary for the next sprint planning meeting and get implemented in the next sprint. This is the sole purpose of the sprint retrospective meeting. Now, although improvements can happen at any point of time during the sprint, this provides a formal platform where the entire team can look back at how they did and what can be improved in order to improve their process in delivering the increment. This is the importance of the sprint retrospective meeting. Now, there are many ways of conducting a sprint retrospective meeting. One of the most common ways is what should we start doing, what should we stop doing, and what should we continue doing. But there are other methods which can be done. What is important is to identify which aspect of the improvement you want to focus on during this meeting, and then make sure that enough discussion happens and a plan is created so that this particular improvement takes place in the next sprint. The sprint retrospective is a meeting where the team builds trust by improving themselves together. To summarize, in this particular section, we discussed about the Scrum events and how these Scrum events provide a formal platform for inspection and adaptation of various artifacts and the team itself. Let's discuss about these artifacts in the next section.